Hi, everybody. Welcome to Mormonish. I'm Rebecca, and there is no Landon to say I'm Landon because he is not able to join us today, but I have replaced him with two amazing guests. You can't help but recognize, of course, Ganesh. How are you this evening, Ganesh?
I'm fabulous, and it's always a treat. So I'm just so excited to be here, particularly today.
It is always a treat. And I don't know if you guys know, but we have a playlist on our YouTube channel that is just called Ganesh because he's been on so many times that if you think you might have missed one or two of his episodes, you can go there and click on it and you can see the list of the episodes that we have done with Ganesh. So check it out, your own playlist. That's saying something, I think.
That's very special, and Mormonish has absolutely my heart.
Oh,
Because we've talked about so many amazing
we have.
different aspects of church history and Joseph Smith and Mormonism in general, and it's broad, so
Yep.
it's been really fun.
There's a never ending supply of topics. And also joining us today is our new friend, Darren. How are you today, Darren?
Hello, how are you? Thank you for having me on, and Ganesh for allowing me to be here too. This is exciting, and I'm not as good as you all are in front of the camera, so we'll see how this goes. I'm the guy at work on the Teams calls that has the camera off.
Oh,
So
you're that guy.
if I fall asleep or get distracted, nobody knows. So
Or you have an avatar of a cat and you have to say, I
right.
am not a cat. That's right. I get it. No, and I'll
Right.
explain to you how we met Darren and why he's on today. So, we're, of course, going to be talking about Darren. Hold up your copy too. Ganesh's new book, Joseph Smith, The Architect of Mormonism, a topical biography. And yeah, as Darren keeps
I think
pointing
that
out,
is.
this is a book. This is quite something. But, and I know that Ganesh has gone on other podcasts to talk about it. There's just so much here. I love it how different podcasts have different spins and you focus on different parts of it, which is great. But Darren is like an uber fan who has been reading his way through this book. And it's so funny because I met Darren on a commuter train. Isn't that funny? We were both on it and he kind of recognized me. And then we started talking about Ganesh's book. And then Ganesh reached out to me and said, hey, I've got this really smart guy, really sharp guy. He's like texting me about the book. And it was Darren. So since we both connected, we thought, let's have Darren on and get his perspective as we go through some information about the book. So right now, I want to tell everybody to pause the video and go out. If you haven't ordered this already, it's on Amazon. You've got to get a copy. Like I said, you got to start reading now. So this is amazing. So we'll let Ganesh kind of just guide the discussion here. And let's just talk about, well, first of all, let's talk about, you just had, was it a signing or something in Wellington, didn't you?
Oh, that's actually tomorrow.
Oh,
Is
that's
my
tomorrow.
a
Okay.
book
See, I'm
launch,
in a
so
different time zone. Yeah. Okay.
so I'm very excited about that because I, the, uh, this is my first book, and I'm new to the world of literature. Really, I'm more of a podcast person. I spend a lot of time listening. I spend I you know I like to read, but I often don't give myself that luxury. So actually physically doing a book and actually holding it in my hands is a real treat. But also the the beauty and the excitement of being able to share ideas where there is something tangible that you can relate to or reference, I think has really been surprising to me how good that is, but also how much that then means you can have really powerful discussions. So I'm incredibly grateful to people like Darren who are taking on board this information and they're utilizing it for their own world and their experiences, and that's really exciting to me too, because I guess when you're writing, you're I'm in my lounge, I'm typing things out, I'm thinking about what they mean to me and what they might possibly mean to other people, but actually you just don't know. You don't know until people start reading and relating what this actually is going to do. And so it's been a real joy to have emails from Darren saying these are the things that I found really impactful, um, and and it's a good chance in this particular forum. This is the first time I've met Darren in person to
Semi
to
person, right?
see my person to ask
Right.
him, and hear his thoughts about what kind of things are impacting him. He's an active member of the church who has a nuanced view, but he has a community and responsibilities that revolve around, what the church is. And I am also active, so I go to church even though I'm a non-believer, and that's well known, but still it's my community, and I'm really sensitive about how this information hits, and and that it's useful, and will help build bridges, because I, as a former bishop, but also as somebody that people come to when they're having really a tough time navigating things like church history, I hear a lot of really hard stories about how this impacts people's relationships and undermines their identity and feelings. And so one of the most important things that I hope for the book, and again, I can't control that, but it is a mechanism for people to be able to have great understanding that leads to peace. Either because you're a member and you've got family who have left and you can understand now why they might have an issue with Joseph, or if you are really struggling with church history or Joseph's life, it's validating to go, oh gosh, this is how it worked out. Maybe you might be able to get some empathy for Joseph and the beginnings of the church that relieves some of that angst and feelings of betrayal that often you find when you discover the story that is in the historical record is quite different from the one that gets put across the pulpit or in gospel doctrine. So those are my hopes. We're going to slightly test that today with Darren to see whether actually that works in practice. So this is cutting edge sociology, and information impact. So yeah, right. And hopefully it's going to be a lot of fun.
I think it will be fun. And while you pull your slides up, because I know you put some stuff together, why don't you tell us, Darren, how you even came across Ganesh's book? Did you know it was coming out? Had you been following him? Because as Ganesh said, Darren is attending, church, somebody that's kind of inside outside, like a lot of us. How did you even come across the book?
Well, I first saw Ganesh on one of your episodes a while ago. I'm trying to remember which one it was, but I was impressed, and I thought this guy knows his stuff. And so I think I did a YouTube search or something, and he came up, and he has, hopefully this is okay, Ganesh, to share this.
Yeah, absolutely.
He has his own YouTube channel, and I think he started doing TikToks years ago and moved that information over to YouTube. Is that right?
That's right. So I do little 3-5 minute TikToks, and then and then publish them on YouTube as a grouping. So maybe 10 at a time, kind of thing.
And so he goes through the Come Follow Me study guide that the church puts out, and he did a whole one on the year with the Book of Mormon, and then the Doctrine and Covenants, which is going on right now. And so I started watching these things, and I'm like, oh my gosh, there's so much stuff here that he references the history and what's going on in Joseph's life at the time, and what's going on with other church members as he's writing certain chapters in the Book of Mormon, and as he's writing, these revelations for the Doctrine and Covenants in this section here and there, and what's going on. And especially for the Doctrine and Covenants, it's helped me out because, you could read a section of the Doctrine and Covenants and you're like, what is this even about? What's going on? You get these 2-verse sections that are Lyman White and Ziba Peterson go preach to the Lamanites and good luck, have fun, amen. And you're like, why is this even in here? What's going on? He provides a bunch of historical context and what's going on. And it made a lot of sense to me. And so I actually emailed him a couple of questions about some things, and he responded back, and I thought, wow, that's great. So we kind of went back and forth, and he talked about his book coming out, and I said, well, let me know when it's ready to come out. I'm definitely interested because I learned so much. I think all that historical context put together that we don't always get, in a lesson, in the pared down lesson manual that we get. It just helped me understand a lot of stuff that for me was confusing, and I couldn't connect the dots. So that really helped out, and I figured, hey, this book is going to be a topical approach of, Mormonism, Joseph Smith's theology and how it was crafted from A to Z, and maybe it's going to help me understand things even more because I've had questions. Like I said,
Mm-hmm.
I have read, done historical searches and things, and you hear things here and there. It's like, oh, how do I make sense of all this? So anyway, that's kind of how that came to be.
Because Darren is not a lazy learner. Let's say that. He has questions and he's searching for answers. Yeah, and the topical nature, I think, is what makes this really unique, Ganesh. And it does allow people just to kind of look through and say, I want to dive into this, or I want to, look a little farther into that. So I think that's unique and a great way to put it together.
Well, that helps me. So that's why I did it, because Mormonism is so vast, and particularly, gosh, I've been looking at this stuff for 10 years, but I keep coming up with new things and new kind of revelations that make me go, oh my gosh, what's happening here? And so being able to make it work this particular way is really, really useful for me personally, and I thought that might make it really useful. I've said many times it didn't start off as a biography. It started off with just kind of trying to explain really the difference between the Book of Mormon and what happened in Nauvoo. And when I looked at that closely and kept looking at it and found lots of places where Mormonism, or at least what is written in the text of the Book of Mormon, became quite different from what the church practices, particularly in Nauvoo, but nowadays, the basis was, just like the slide kind of shows, that the Book of Mormon is Joseph at 23. He's a young man trying to make his way in the world. He's got a new wife. He's trying to have a baby. His first baby dies. He hates farming and laboring, which is what he's been doing. He wants to be something better, and he needs something a bit more substantial because his parents are relying on him because his older brother Alvin has died, and Hiram is good but not a great provider. His father's not really coming to the party, and so he needs something. He needs a big win, and the Book of Mormon becomes that big win. But of course, by the time that he's 38, he's in Nauvoo. He's like this photo suggests, he's the general of the Nauvoo Legion. He's the mayor of the city. He's the prophet of the church. He's everything. And so it's quite a different person by Nauvoo, and the kinds of things that he's reacting to, the ways that he's looking at God, are really different. And so that's why we have this really odd dichotomy in the church of a Book of Mormon Mormonism and a Nauvoo Mormonism, and they are quite different, but they are both Joseph. It's just two different Josephs, two different maturities. And so effectively that's what this book is about, the idea that Joseph is the architect of Mormonism. Mormonism is Joseph is Mormonism, and the Book of Mormon can be explained as a 23-year-old young man, and Nauvoo can be explained as a 38-year-old mature, more seasoned person. So that's basically what it is and how it works, and hopefully there's enough data points that show all of that is makes a good chronology for deconstructing these topics and going through each one and figuring out what is actually happening, how it's progressing, sometimes how it's completely changing and flipping and contradicting, but these are all related to the circumstances that Joseph finds himself in.
Yeah, I think this is why you've gotten such great reviews, like really good reviews from other podcasters, from, historian scholars, just because you do have all those touch points and you have them presented in a way that it makes it really clear, and maybe, lining up some dots that people didn't see before, except for you're showing it this way. So it is really unique. So again, everybody go out and buy this. All right. What are you going to talk to us tonight about? I know that you had a little bit of a different spin on something that you wanted to present.
Right. Well, let's just go to the next slide. So, this is just a slide about the different biographies that are available. And of course, I just do a plug for John Turner, who's just released his biography, and as a non-member of the church but a person of faith, looking at Joseph, I think he'll give us a completely different idea of Joseph and the world that Joseph is inhabiting. And I'm pretty sure you've got a copy there, Rebecca, have you?
I do somewhere. I was trying to dig it up here. Let's see. While you keep talking, I'll see if I can find. I've got this huge stack of books on the other side. Oh, yeah, here it is. Here we go.
Oh, yes.
We'll go like this.
Oh, yes, and hopefully the fact that they kind of released at the same time, which was a little bit of a coincidence. Mine was supposed to be out years ago, of course, so I'm really late, and John probably had no idea that I even existed. So there's that. But hopefully you're talking about Joseph from different aspects, and you'll get a fuller Joseph from reading both, along with the ones that have already been done, particularly by Dan Vogel. Dan Vogel's done some incredible work. His Charisma Under Pressure, just a couple of years ago, was fabulous, and Richard Bushman has also done a number. So those are good. So, if I had to kind of plug the book, the ways that I would do it would be just to tell you some of the numbers involved. It's 605 pages, so it's way too big, and it's actually too big for a hardcover, because Amazon only do that to 550 pages. So if I'd known that, I'd cut down some more, but that's what it is. There's 45 topical chapters and a few others that are useful, and there are 5 sections basically talking about the beginning of America and the settler worldview that underpinned the expansion into the West. Then there's those Native American understandings, of course, because these settlers are displacing Native Americans as they are taking on new land. There's all these great theologies, because this is the burnt over district in Western New York where Joseph is living. And he has a number of particular prejudices, mainly around his poverty, because Joseph is incredibly poor, but he's come from wealth. So he's got these he's got delusions of grandeur because his family are doing pretty well. Joseph's and the Smiths in general were the poor cousins. They were, the Mack family, the Smith family were all doing well. Joseph Smith Sr. and Lucy Mack were not. So those are some pretty big obstacles to overcome for the young Joseph Jr. And then the magic worldview, the idea that he believed in this esoteric world that was unseen, and this played out with regard to treasure digging and looking for hidden knowledge that was part of his world. And so those are the chapters in the book, and they start from very broad American ideas through to really specific things that happen in Joseph's life. And I tried to link everything, and so you get a good full picture of what's happening and the underpinnings of a particular subject. And then I also talk a bit about Joseph's ideology. So why did things play out the way they did? Well, Joseph had some ideas about how he could be something special, and that played out in some really interesting ways. So there are 350 historical references, most of them from the Joseph Smith Papers Project, because this is something I wouldn't have been able to do 5 years ago, because I can look up everything on my laptop in my lounge in Wellington, New Zealand, and that means every single other person could do that same thing too. So I put lots of references in there, and you can check where I'm getting those sources, and hopefully that gives you a good grounding to know that it's accurate, or at least you can go and check for yourself if you come to the same conclusions. And the reason it's so thick is there's 1,500 LDS scriptural references, and many of them I had to, when I'm trying to explain these subjects, I didn't want to just put the reference. I wanted to quote the verse, because if you're reading it and I give you an idea and I say, look, this is a 19th century idea, but it's in the Book of Mormon, it's good if I can give you the full context so you can see it in its chronology. that meant that I've copied a lot of the Book of Mormon into the book.
You can get credit for reading your scriptures just by reading through his book.
That's it. That's exactly
You
right.
don't have to do both.
That's right. And the beauty of that too is you get to read it in a kind of in its cultural context and in its chronology, which I think makes it hugely valuable to understand what's actually going on in the thought process at the moment that it's being created, which I think is really special. But it does mean that then there's a whole lot of verses, and I did that mostly because I thought that lots of people, particularly active believing members, might read this and just not believe what I was saying unless they could actually read it, and I didn't want them to have to put down my thing in order to go check it in the Book of Mormon.
And there it is. So you're not quite finished with it, Darren, right? You're still kind of making your way through it. I mean, it is 605 pages. So are you reading straight through, or are you jumping topics?
Yeah, I've been reading straight through, and I'm quite a ways through it. I'm not to the very end, but
you know how it ends.
Yeah, and there is, like he said, and I do like, and it's made the book's bigger, but I do like he's cut and pasted. Here is, Alma chapter 5 verses 12 through 15, which references, whatever he's talking about in that chapter. So you don't have to go open your scriptures and flip back and forth. It's right there, and you can just. To me, I thought that's great. It's so convenient and it's easy, and it's all right there on the same page. So, how lazy we are today. I mean, if I have to open the book or click something, but it's I love that aspect of it.
Well, I'm glad that actually works, because that was probably the thing I was most hesitant about, is putting in so much, but just and of course that has some implications for the size of it, but also it means that it slows down the reading, which I think is problematic. But I don't know that people would necessarily believe it. They'd go, you say that there's some magic, folk magic in the Book of Mormon? Where? Exactly. The reference, and they'd go, and unless I kind of highlighted and underlined it, maybe they wouldn't be able to see it. Yeah. So that's a really big deal. The other part of that is there's 60 data. Well, there's an average then of 60 data points per chapter, which means that there's hopefully a really solid chronology, and every chapter in the Book of Mormon is referenced. So I make the case that this is Joseph. It's not just that it's a Nephite core and an understanding. It really is Joseph doing all of this and bringing in his ideas of his environment into the Book of Mormon. And I just wanted to make reference to some incredible mentors I've had as part of this process, right? Richard Turley, who's writing a current biography of Joseph as well for the church. Charlie Harrell, who did This Is My Doctrine, and a seminal work in understanding Joseph's and the church and its trajectory and development in terms of its theology, and Brent Metcalf, who a fellow Kiwi who really brought the Messiah priority to the forefront and has been an incredible scholar. So those guys I always check in on a number of things, and particularly Rick. We check in on what I'm trying to achieve, and the kind of tone that I tried to do, his work with regard to the Mountain Meadows massacre, bringing that information to a faithful audience, plus those who are critical, and navigating that balance between those two has been really helpful for me in trying to get a similar feel for this particular book. And then a ton of other incredible scholars who have reviewed chapters and made suggestions and given me other places to have a look, and then tons of others who have helped along the way, including Mormonish, of course, because we've fleshed out a lot of these ideas by podcast over the last couple of years, which has been so much fun. and then and also Lacey Waldorf, who was my editor, who made sure that she held my feet to the fire with regard to a lot of the claims that I made, and made sure that I qualified them. So hopefully it's got some robust, ability to really deliver. And I guess we've already kind of talked about why and those bridging of those gaps, and I get and maybe it's time for a bit of information from Darren. I mean, what are some of the things that you've found that have been really useful to you? What are some of the chapters that you've that have given you some good insight, but also maybe helped you feel like you really know what's going on?
Like I said, I loved all the references that we already talked about, and the topical approach just helps my mind. If you're thinking about a specific doctrine or teaching, you could, you focus in on that. There's a whole chapter with references, and it may not match up with, a timeline from year to year to year, but you can jump right to a topic and get everything, whether that topic is in 1828 or 1838, you cover the whole span. And so you could stay on that topic, and that my simple mind, it works better that way if I can just focus on one thing. And so, that was very helpful to me. I really like the theology chapter that hopefully we can talk about a little bit, which is probably the my biggest focus, and there you have it right there. With my faith and my concerns and things I've ran into over the years is theology, and I get conflicting. We're told the gospel is so simple and straightforward, but I guess it depends on at what time and at what point in the church's history are you focusing on, because early Book of Mormon theology and teachings about the Godhead or the role of Christ are vastly different than in the Nauvoo period, like you mentioned. There's things in the Book of Mormon, it's the fullness of the gospel. However, in the Book of Mormon, there's not one really specific, unique Mormon doctrine that I know of, like the 3 degrees of glory, pre-earth life, baptism for the dead, celestial marriage. These things, they're not anywhere to be found in the Book of Mormon. Polygamy, it's actually anti-polygamy in the Book of Mormon. So, there's all these different things. Like how do I put all these pieces together? So that chapter really helped me out a lot. One thing, just kind of as an overall general plug for the book, if it's okay, if we have a few minutes and I can give a little background of myself, I think it might help make sense. But anyway, I grew up in the church, believer, never questioned anything until you go on a mission. And that's kind of a big point in life. It's like, okay, do I really believe this? What am I going to, I'm going to go out here for 2 years. That's when I really read the Book of Mormon for the first time, to be honest, and tried to figure out what I was going to be teaching people. And like I said, there were a lot of simple things in there. And as I went to the mission field and began teaching people, you start finding and interacting with people with a lot of different beliefs that you need to then kind of, figure out in your mind, well, how does this work with what I've been taught? And anyway, I served in New York, actually in the Rochester mission, the cradle of the Restoration, Joseph Smith land. I know where else better place to be called than where Joseph Smith was from. And so, I went out with the Joseph Smith narrative that we're taught in the church, that here's Jesus and here's Joseph Smith, just a hair under him, and he's perfect and never done anything wrong. And I went out that way, and I get there, and in New York is the first time I was ever, and I served in the 90s, so this dates me a little bit, but first time I ever saw anything negative about Joseph Smith. There's a lot of church history sites there, and so there's a lot of anti-Mormon groups that would congregate not on the church's property, just outside the church's property, and they would have signs and give out their literature. And then they used to have the Hill of Cumorah pageant. They stopped, I don't know when they stopped it years ago, but they used to have it when I was there, and it was like 2 weeks or 10 days of just a full-on production on the hill itself, acting out stories of the Book of Mormon and Joseph Smith's life. And people would come from all over the world. My second year, I was with the mission president, working with him, and I was able to go every night and just, take that in. And there were a lot of members from all over the world, but then there were a lot of, anti-groups there giving out their stuff and their literature. So it's the first time I ever saw something negative. And of course, our mission president would tell us, stay away from these people. It's all lies. It's all made up. Don't engage with them. We even had Richard G. Scott came out and spoke to us once. He was an apostle and spoke to the whole mission. He actually had gone into the sacred grove the night before and prayed. And he came and told us that he had a revelation that that area had been cursed. We were a very low baptizing mission, and that area had been cursed because of all the lies and the persecution of Joseph Smith and the saints over the years. And that he felt at that time that cursing would be lifted, and we would, the field was white, and as long as we were obedient, there's always that, caveat like your patriarchal blessing. As long as we're obedient, we'll go ahead and we're going to baptize like crazy. And that didn't happen. It probably did after I left. I was probably the one holding us back. But anyway.
It's always you, right? It's always, turn the finger. It's always something
you.
We did, right?
Probably me. But
never the church, never Joseph.
Yeah. Oh, never.
But anyway, so, even he said that, there was a lot of these lies and things made up. And so, of course, don't engage with them. Well, what do you do as a missionary? You're young, and we're going to thrash the nations with the word of God, and I can convert all these people. And so we talked to them, and anyway, I heard all the stuff that Joseph Smith was into magic, and he used a seer stone, this peep stone, to translate the Book of Mormon. He didn't even have the plates with him. He was arrested for treasure seeking and duping people, and he was a polygamist. And I'm like, what? Where are they getting this stuff? These people are whack. It's lies. I testified to them that no, this is untrue. Joseph Smith never was a polygamist. That started with Brigham Young in Utah because all the women died, or all the men died on the plains, and they had to, Brigham Young had to marry their lives to support them. Anyway, the whole narrative, and this is what I was taught, and even our mission president, like I said. Anyway, so I kind of blew it off. I'm like, these people are crazy. Well, fast forward 20 years, the gospel topic essays come out, and I read these things, and I'm like, this is the church publishing this stuff is the exact stuff I was told on my mission that was anti-Mormon lies. And so I'm floored. I'm reading this. Joseph Smith had 33 wives. What? Are you kidding me? And it gets worse. Some of those wives were married to other men. And I'm just like, are you kidding me? I'm out here, bashing with people, telling them they're telling me lies, and they're truths that the church just published. And so this caused me a lot of conflict. I'm like, what's going on? And it takes me to one. I think about this, I think daily. There's a woman that we baptized who we're at her baptism. We're in the font. I'm standing in the font. The doors are closed, the accordion doors. She's ready to come down, and she says, I can't do this. I was just at work last night, and all of my friends said, you're joining a cult. They told me all this stuff about Joseph Smith, and I'm like, oh no, they're lies. Don't worry about it. Just try and get baptized. You'll get the Holy Ghost, and then you'll be able to tell truth, and the whole thing. And she's like, oh, I don't know. And my companion's opening the door, going, what's going on in there? I can't hold these people off any longer. Let's read. So I talk her in this. I almost forced this lady to be baptized, and I read the gospel topic essays 20 years later, and I'm like, are you kidding me? I felt guilty, and so all these thoughts have went through my mind for years, and I'm, but I love the church. I love the teachings. I love the people, but I also want truth. And so I've had a lot of conflict, to say the least, in my mind. And so sorry, I'm getting to the point here. What this book has done for me is all these puzzle pieces now start fitting together, and by topic, which is perfect for me. And like I said, this slide is great. They all start piecing together. I'm like, oh, okay, so this is how this started. This is why Joseph taught this and thought this way. And this is why, at this point, there's pivot points that I love that Ganesh points out in here. Certain things in his life would happen, and he would sometimes do a full 180, teaching and practicing one thing, and now all of a sudden he's going a whole other way. And so and you get a good idea of what's going on around him with all these references from the scripture, from the scriptures, Joseph Smith papers, and I'm starting to put these pieces of the puzzle together, and I'm like, this makes sense. This is helping me understand it. Now, are there still conflicts of what I've been taught and told and not? Yes, but it's definitely helped me get some understanding, and I'm like, I'm not crazy. Ganesh has found this out. Other people have found this out. You put all these together. I'm not nuts for having these feelings, because I can't stand up and say, I know this is true. I know, in the shadow of a doubt, blah, blah, blah. I've not been able to do that. And I see other people do it. And I'm like, why can't I do that? So you can see I've been conflicted, but this has helped me reconcile some of that in my mind. So sorry, that was a way roundabout, answer, but that the book has helped me a lot that way.
I think that's just what Ganesh wants to hear, because that's kind of exactly why you wrote it.
If that makes sense. I'm like I said, I'm
does.
talking here. I probably rambled all over the place.
No. It absolutely makes sense. I think that's wonderful.
That's beautiful. That's exactly what I hoped, right? I mean, in my lounge, thinking about what are the things that I'm conflicted about, and how do I make sense of it, and would this be any use to anybody else? That's hugely validating, Darren. That's just so. That's awesome. I couldn't hope for anything greater than that. So I thank you.
Well, and like I say, it makes sense. It helps me make sense of Joseph Smith. He's a complex person like us. None of us are all good. None of us are all bad, right? We're all complex individuals. We're not like the sixth grade story we write of the character where the hero never does anything wrong and the villain's evil all the time. But one thing while I was reading the book, I realized, you know what? The Book of Mormon characters are like that. You have the righteous individuals, Alma and Nephi, they're perfect. They never do anything wrong, or we don't hear about it. And then you've got the villains who are always evil and always wicked. And even Alma the Younger and the sons of Messiah, who are evil, they're all evil. And then once they're converted, they're 100% good. They spend every waking minute for the rest of their life righting their wrongs. And so it's this, simplified character, which really were not like that. And Joseph Smith wasn't like that either. And I, like you pointed out earlier, he was in some dire circumstances early in his life. And I can see probably why he made some of the choices he did. It kind of just helps me out to see he's a human, he's a complex person like us, like me. So.
Fabulous. So fabulous. Gosh. All right. Wow. Yeah, that's beautiful. Thanks, Darren. That's, fabulous. Let's have a look at the I thought, for this particular presentation that we might like to, if I'm thinking about this book as a mechanism to explain stuff, and put it into chapters so that you can look at it by topic, and then there's sections that look at various themes. There are also cross themes that come up again and again with Joseph. Like you said, Darren, the idea that he did come from some pretty tough circumstances, right? So that underpinned a lot of what was going on for him, and the choices that he made, and the things that he went on, and so there are a number of those things, and I think poverty is a huge one that just goes throughout Joseph's life, and it underpins his fears and his worries, and the ways that he tried to alleviate his own poverty and provide for his immediate family, but also his extended family, and particularly his parents, who were still looking after young children when they had, basically lost their family farm. These were huge issues for Joseph. One of the interesting dynamics that plays out through the book, but through Joseph's life, is one of violence. And so Dan McClellan is working on a kind of a compendium, a whole lot of 5-minute essays for college-age students, basically explaining parts of Mormonism. And so he's reached out to a few people, and I've been one of them. And so I've done a chapter in his book related to how violence, impacts Mormonism. And this is a really big theme. It's a theme that other people have recognized. Of course, I've got the best-selling book ever. This is the #1 book on Mormonism, right? John Krakauer's Under the Banner of Heaven. And of course, part of that was made into that series. But, it's a feature of Mormonism that particularly those outside of Mormon can absolutely see, and a feature that lots of Mormons don't see, or at least explain on the basis of maybe persecution. And so there's quite a bit in that understanding of violence, and I thought that it might be worth, if I had a chance to talk about some of the things that I've learned about Joseph and the beginnings of Mormonism and how that impacts today. Violence is a really important one, and I put it in just kind of 6 categories or 6 slides that we can look at. And the first one's on erasure. So that he took somebody else's story, particularly Native Americans, and he gave them a backstory which wasn't their story, and effectively erased their real story. And that was going on in early 19th century America, but Joseph managed to do that quite violently. He took from them to provide for himself, which I think is a key thing. Then there's the whole idea of compliance and conformity and coercion that happens in the early church and still exists today. Excommunication is one of those bits of coercion and compliance that was a part of the early church and still is today. Secrecy and death oaths. This was a major part of the early church, and continuing right through to the 1990s, at least in the temple. I went through the temple in 1991, so I did not, get these death oaths, but of course many of my friends did, and I'm picking Rebecca, you did. Darren, you might have been like me and after 1990. So, but death oaths were a part of the temple covenants, and they were a major part of Joseph's life and the way that the church started. And then, of course, demonizing others, and along with that persecution complex that those other people over there are our enemies and they're fighting against us, and we're really righteous, and the only reason that we're getting this pushback is because they're being influenced by Satan, and Satan doesn't want this work to continue. So, and that's a very common and pervasive understanding that allows for lots of violence in the Mormon space. And then militarization and warfare, and this is not necessarily a part of things today, but it was very much a part of the early church, and we're going to talk about how that played out. And really, that was a major pivot point in Joseph's life is war. So, okay, so erasure. Gosh, what is erasure? Well, it's just when something that is true has been completely wiped out and supplanted with something that is untrue. And this is very much the story of Native Americans in the United States. And as European settlers moved westward, displacing Native Americans, they had to explain why it was that these people were as they were and why it was okay to take their land. And so there were numerous explanations. One of them was, of course, the mound builder myth. And Joseph took those ideas and he put a even more spiritual narrative on that. He created a curse history where the color of their skin, was a sign of how God felt about them. This justified, their displacement because, of course, they weren't the original inheritors of the land. They were the unrighteous usurpers. And then this also then explained why God wanted the Native Americans wiped out, or at least severely scattered and smitten, because they were wicked. And of course, then it demonized them as a group of people and erased their language. And this happened to Native Americans, but then it also, as the church expanded into Central and South America, it did the same thing to them. And as it went out into the Pacific, it also did that to Polynesian people, and said that actually their roots were back to the Lamanites and the Nephites of the Book of Mormon. And that was an honor, but it also meant that they were cursed and fallen and needed to be redeemed. So this was it justified a lot of violence, and it then gave more evidence for more violence. And of course, when Brigham Young went to Utah, if this happened, if the people wouldn't convert, that just then confirmed that they were fallen and were worthy of destruction. And so a number of massacres and bloodshed, and wiping out of native peoples happened in Utah particularly, but not only Utah, of course, because Joseph gave Native Americans this history and explained that if they didn't redeem themselves by converting to Christianity and the Book of Mormon, that they were just confirming their fallen status, and therefore they were unworthy to live. As sad as that is. I've got a scripture there. Darren, do you want to read it? Because I think it's one of many in the Book of Mormon, but it's a good one.
Yeah, sure. First Nephi 13:14, and it came to pass that I beheld many multitudes of the Gentiles upon the land of promise, and I beheld the wrath of God, that it was upon the seed of my brethren, the Lamanites, and they were scattered before the Gentiles and were smitten.
Yeah. So Joseph gave this explanation. Why were the natives so dirty and disgusting and savage? Well, they were fallen and cursed. And why were the Gentiles who came to America blessed to take over? Because they were now the new inheritors, and they could wipe out the people that were here before. It's a very sad but very common story.
And I find it interesting that when the Book of Mormon was first published, there was a huge focus on the Lamanites. I mean, it was to bring about their salvation. And it seems like, there was a tiny bit of effort put into that. There's a section in the Doctrine and Covenants where I think Oliver Cowdery and Ziba Peterson, a couple are sent to go to the Lamanites, and they don't have the right permits or whatever the intricacies were of that. The mission failed, and they just kind of gave up, and you don't really ever hear of a whole lot of effort after that. So it's just like, didn't work, never mind, we'll focus on something else. Which you read the Book of Mormon, it's like, this is for their salvation. This is the whole point of this thing. And it just seemed like there was not a lot of effort, which I may be missing out on, but that's kind of what I've gathered.
No, I think you're right. And we also need to think about the other group that were erased were the island peoples, right? Mm-hmm. Their history and heritage was also erased by this, So,
and that's massive, because Polynesian people, joined the church in droves. In Utah now, right? We've got a ton of Tongans and Samoans.
Yeah, they have a
Cook
whole
Islands
different
even,
history, divergent, based on the Book of Mormon. Yeah,
it's so sad. And look, Joseph had these grand plans, right? He would, presented this book as Native American history with the idea that they would be converted, and then, but he didn't think about them. He didn't think about how the story might look to them. No, who wants to be the villain of the story? Your Laban, who is who is unfaithful, and the reason why you're being killed in large droves as Native Americans is because you're fallen, and God is, according to 1 Nephi 13:14, wrathful with you. Like, that's not a narrative that brought in Native Americans. It didn't make them feel like they were, special. So pretty much, conversion amongst Native Americans was next to zero. And so this meant that was a major pivot for Joseph, that he went, okay, well, who is joining the church? Well, it's poor displaced people in America and Canada. And then when they sent missionaries to England, these were these people in these terrible circumstances in crowded cities of industrialized Britain, who were hearing these stories about, wealth and land and good air, in America. And so those people joined in droves and came to, to Nauvoo and then to Utah, and made the situation worse because they were now displacing the local native peoples. So yep. Joseph made that all happen, and in terrible ways, and that particular legacy is horrific. So I know it's a really tough one. It's a tough one for me because I live in New Zealand, of course, and New Zealand's a brown church. It's made up of Pacific Island people, Maori, Samoan, Tongan. This is and it's a pride to the people here, and yet it's completely an erasure of their actual history and their actual accomplishments and their actual identity, and that's an incredible violence to take away from somebody their real history and supplant it with a fake history that propagates your agenda. It's a form of colonization. Yeah, just really problematic. All right. Oh, we all love this one.
Yeah, I love that picture. That's awesome. Look at that.
Compliance, conformity, and coercion. And poor Joseph was an angel with a flaming sword came to force Joseph to practice polygamy, or at least that's what he told the women that were wondering why they should even engage in such a thing. But apparently he was going to die if they did not acquiesce to his to the Lord's command. So this is another really, really tricky one because it's pervasive, and it underpinned Joseph's life in the ways that he told his story, but also it has huge implications today. And we've got lots of books on this, but tons of experiences with this. So I just wanted to highlight a few things about Joseph's life that were a part of this. And one is that he was a bit of a fighter. He was poor, and so he would get into scraps, and he had to fight for everything, and some of that was physically. So that was just his life, and I mean it's really tough. There's an account where Lucy Mack Smith talks about how on the trip from New England through to Western New York, basically he was made to walk when he has a lame leg, of course, because he had that leg surgery. That he was whipped by the team master. Like he got it pretty brutal, and there doesn't seem to be any indication that the domestic violence was a part of his life, but he certainly suffered a number of altercations, and as a boy and as a young man and even as a young married man.
And then interestingly, he liked to wrestle and kind of fight for fun, right? I remember being really fascinated by a picture it was like a boxed set of the Joseph Smith history. They were big brown books. And maybe some of you guys remember those from a long time ago, but there was a picture where, he was doing that pulling sticks, right? Where you're kind of back and forth. So he definitely liked to throw around his physical prowess, and it makes it sound like he'd almost meet somebody and say, hey, want to wrestle? Whatever that means. So it is kind of interesting.
Yeah, he was a manly man, and
He was a manly man.
Yep. He was physical. He was quite a tall guy. Like, he did have some physicality. I mean, although he had a bung leg and he walked with a cane the majority of his life, he he was a farm laborer. He worked hard. He got a lot of his prowess from his physicality.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a big part of how he expressed himself. So yeah, there's a big deals. And look, the earliest accounts of the acquisition of the Book of Mormon record, right, the plates, they were, Lucy Mack Smith talks about them in terms of him being, thrown back by the guardian for not doing the right thing. These were physical altercations. And even in the Book of Mormon, we see that kind of shock effect that angels, or that Nephi had. There's or the idea that the angels would shake the ground. The physicality of and violence that might be done. Even of course when Jesus visits the Americas and just destroys everything. There's a very vindictive Jesus who is violent. This is the makeup of Joseph's understanding of God at some level. That God is violent. And of course, Laban's murder in the beginning of the Book of Mormon is very much why does Laban have to die? Can't we just tie him up? Or if God can take care of the fact that he's incapacitated by being drunk, is he not going to sleep for the next 2 days or whatever?
Yeah.
Why does he have to die? Joseph is, there's a lot of physical violence that happens in the Book of Mormon that seems to be an indication that Joseph has these fantasies of violence, fantasies of violence to people who may have wronged him in some way or another.
I never noticed how violent the Book of Mormon was. I mean, when I was reading it as a kid or a teenager, I didn't read it too closely. When I started encouraging, my little kids to read it or read to them, I was like, I don't know, and I mean, my own kids or primary classes, I'm like, I don't know if I want to share this story. This is very violent. And I know that the murder of Laban has come under scrutiny lately because it was used in the Lori Vallow defense in her latest trial in Arizona. And you have the prosecutor up there saying, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the story of Laban, but, and she kind of described it and said Lori in her text to her brother, who she wanted to kill, her husband, kind of said, you gotta be like Nephi. You gotta Nephi up. You gotta do it. So Elder Rasband recently in the New Gospel Topics essay about violence, religious violence, kind of took that on and was trying to describe it, trying to make it better. But I think he made it so much worse, because he said something to effect that, well, Nephi, first of all, he didn't want to do it. It was only when God told him to do it that he did it. And he made sure that it was a revelation and a commandment before he did it. And as I've said before, well, enter the Lafferty brothers into the chat, right? Or Lori Vallow, or anybody that wants to say, God told me to commit an act of violence. So as much as I try to explain it away, it is very problematic.
These are the waters that the Book of Mormon, that Joseph and really the church swim in, and we all think of ourselves as incredibly kind, generous people, so we don't even equate the idea that these underpinnings of justified violence that is God sanctioned throughout all of the things that we are dealing with, which is, I think, really, really problematic. Obviously,
well, you've heard stories of people asking, I asked my grandma, would she kill someone if God told her to do it, And these, like you said, faithful, sweet little old ladies, if God told me to do it, I would have to do it, you know? Or I read one recently where somebody asked a missionary, would you kill your child? Like they, in the Bible, they've had scenarios where God told you, and I don't have kids yet, so I can't say, instead of the answer, no. So there is this sense that everybody's a sleeper cell. And if God tells you to do it, you don't know what you're going to do. I mean, recently God told everybody to say that, the height of the steeple made a big difference, and everybody jumped on board with that, right? If you're faithful. But there is that undercurrent that anything can happen if you think God is telling you to do it. So I don't know, Darren, what do you think about this, the whole concept, the sleeper cell? I use that all the time.
Yeah, I mean, and my whole life I've struggled with praying for something or direction or guidance, and I'm like, is this me? Is this God telling me this? What is this feeling? So, I mean, if I got the feelings to kill someone, I would have to second guess. But you're right. I mean,
you have to go to the celestial room, really pray about it, really think about it. So, but
yeah,
not even physical violence, but violence kind of spirit, in that, will you shun and disown your child because they're not living a lifestyle that's, you're able to commit these acts that go against your nature, just for the sake of your religion. And I think today it's more, think about better to come home in a pine box than dishonored from your mission. That's very violent, right? There are all kinds of metaphors like that where, that people are very too comfortable with using to cut people off, to distance yourselves, to shun, to ignore. That's also a form, of emotional violence.
yeah.
Absolutely, I'm glad you brought that up, because that's where that kind of compliance and conformity and coercion happen, right? Because it's not generally I'm gonna hit you upside the head if you don't do this, right? It's I'm going to withdraw my love. I'm going to to take care of this other family member or sibling or child, and going to put them first because you're not conforming to what I think is the way it is. And there are tons of these throughout the scriptures, particularly the Doctrine and Covenants. You can't read the Doctrine and Covenants sections without there being something like, God is, God's second coming is imminent, and that the wicked are going to be destroyed. And so if you are on the fence at the moment, you're going to be one of those people that are going to suffer the wrath of God. And so you need to get on the Lord's side and support the prophet and support Joseph. And otherwise, there's going to be consequences, and they are spelled out again and again and again in the Doctrine and Covenants sections. So Joseph thoroughly believed and preached a vindictive God who was just on the edge of giving you a thrashing because you were wicked. So violence was very much the motivation for following Joseph as prophet, and doing what you were told as with regard to your church membership.
Yeah. And don't they say nothing hurts like Mormon love, which means we're doing it for your own good. This comes from a place of love. We're going to shun you until you return because we're so worried about you, right? The focus is on the next life. Whatever happens here, emotional violence, withdrawing, shunning, that's all necessary to save you in the next life. And that's all part of it. It's really heartbreaking.
Look, and I've had to apologize for acts of violence. I mean, I remember pulling my son, or the mattress he was sleeping on, off his bed, because he was not getting up for seminary.
Exactly.
Yep. I didn't sold him with my fists, but like I made his life miserable, because he didn't want to go to seminary. I've had to just absolutely kind of apologize again and again and again for that, or not even just that. Many instances where I yelled at the kids to get in the car so that we could get to church, and then at church I play happy families like I hadn't just berated them a few minutes earlier. These are all acts of coercion underpinned by physical or emotional or verbal abuse. And I have been guilty of this because that's what we were taught, that's the acceptable, because that's got how God is dealing with his children too, right? That's exactly what it says in the Doctrine and Covenants. That's what it, so these are really problematic, and they underpin our interactions.
Yeah, and most of us would not parent like God parents in any of the scriptures. It's very arbitrary, it's very violent, it's all of that. But you're right, the church puts you in these positions where you're at odds with your kids. And I've done it too, yelling at them, you will go to church this morning, you will get up, or you're not going to have any screen time, puts us in that position where I remember one time my oldest said to me, Mom, it's really obvious you don't even want to go. He was right. I didn't want to go, but I felt, I had to force him to go. And I think about modesty standards, right? The sleeve. How many mothers fought their daughters? You are not leaving the house with that. You are not modest. This is why those of us who grew up with that and now everything's just fine are just so, are you kidding me? The amount of discord it caused between mothers and daughters as you fought for an extra inch on a prom dress so you didn't look like a, geek or whatever. It's institutional, and it put mothers and daughters at odds where that never had to be there. It doesn't exist now, but back then, boy, I'm sure in the comments you guys can talk about mother-daughter screaming matches of I am going to wear this, or I'm going to change into this when I get there. It just puts relationships at odds, and relationships are the collateral damage. They really are.
Yeah.
Fighting my son to go to Scouts and get his Eagle Scout. I hated Scouts growing up. And I'm like, you're going to get your Eagle Scout because it's yeah.
You would never do that. Imagine if we were just allowed to talk to our kids. What do you want to do? What are you interested in? Oh, you want to play the cello? Awesome. If the kid decides, you never have to fight them to get in the car and go to those lessons or do those things. But there were certain prescribed things in the church that they had to do, and their salvation was on the line. So of course you're going to use coercion or violence, like dragging their covers off and shoving them out of bed to get to seminary. It's just what you did. Oh, it's so frustrating you wish you had a do-over, right? I do.
Yeah. Oh, well, I do now too. Like I am, particularly with that particular son that I had. My first son was very compliant. He was just doing everything right. And my second son was like, oh, I don't want to do that. Or why do I have to do that? Really made me bad. And so we butted heads a lot, and it got quite physical because these kids get big, and these young men get bigger than me, and stronger. So it got really, really problematic. And now, looking back, I feel so guilty and so dumb for for those particular things. So whenever I see him, he's a grown man now. He's got his own life. But whenever I see him, I hug him. I hold his hand. Yeah. I tell him how much I love him. I go over the top with with affection for him because, not because that's what I should have been doing all along, right? Mm-hmm. But I want to make sure that he never feels the way I made him feel when he was a teenager over these issues. And the funniest thing is that he's got a younger brother who was very much like him. And by the time that kid was a teenager, I changed a lot. So I'm a lot more patient with those things. And he says, you're too soft on this particular other child. You were really hard on me. And I say, look, I'm really soft on him because I know I was hard on you, and I'm really sorry I was hard on you. I will never do that again. And his hug. So
hindsight 2020. And how many of us forced our kids to go to the bishop? I don't want to go to the interview. You will go, I can't even make that list of things that I regret like that.
I've got some horror stories there too. Things I had to apologize for.
All my kids hate the youngest because he's got it easy, and
exactly.
We're smarter as we get older as parents, but we're also tired. I'm tired. I don't want to fight. I don't want to fight the fight. my
It's so
God.
true. Just in finishing off this particular slide, I wanted to share with you a number of Joseph's assaults. So he was brought up, like he and his brother William fought very physical, incredibly bad fights. So those were horrendous. Calvin Stoddard, Joseph's brother-in-law, he went to court over this. They settled out of court, but that was big. Joseph surrounded Justice Adam Black with a posse and forced him to sign a declaration of peace. Lilburn Boggs, it's never been proven, of course, but it looks likely, or at least Joseph talked about violence to the Lilburn Boggs, and then Porter Rockwell happened to be in the same area at the same time that Lilburn Boggs got shot. And then there was also a tax collector in 1843 that Joseph assaulted. This actually precipitated the anti-Mormon party in Warsaw. So, fighting, assaults, lots of people talk about Joseph as being loving, sure, but also, if you had to be careful. If you crossed him, he would get violent. He would kick you. He would take you, and he would physically manhandle you out the door. Kick you in the back. Right? There was, he might have really, really loved his friends and cared about them a great deal, but he did not suffer any backlash of anything, or correction for that matter. And then, of course, we had the Danites. The Danites formed in 1838 after this big Kirtland scandal and a huge apostasy from the church, and they were part of those enforcers. They would support the presidency of, this was their mandate and their constitution. They would support the presidency of the church, whether they were right or wrong. This was when tithing was implemented in 1838, and the Danites were part of the enforcers of this. And the Danites, morphed into the secret agenda of the police in Nauvoo. They're part of the strength, the legacy of the strengthening members committee that exists today in the church. So these forms of compliance, conformity, and coercion are very much embedded in the way that the church is. And of course, there's that angel with the flaming sword that we started off with, Joseph, coerced people into, complying based on the idea that they were responsible for Joseph's harm if he didn't, follow through with commandments from God. So these are very manipulative and problematic ways that you might, the end justifies the means, right? The idea that if this faith in God is coming, then it doesn't matter how you get to it, as long as it's got, and we as parents, and I have been guilty of that. I will get them to church whatever way, because when they're at church, they'll feel the Spirit and they won't remember the fact that I yelled at them, beforehand. So, I
think about how he, would tell people, oh, your entire family's salvation is at stake unless you do what I want. I mean, that's so manipulative. It's like the ultimate manipulation. And I mean, that kind of rhetoric still goes on today. You have somebody that loses a child. This is a recent scenario that I became aware of. And, they said, now you need to stay in the church, because if you don't, that child is lost to you forever. I mean, just this using your family, holding them hostage the next life, to keep you in line. I know maybe they don't see it as manipulative and coercive, but it absolutely is. It absolutely is to hold someone's family like that,
So tricky. And, this is the legacy that Joseph engaged in, right?
Yep.
Number 3, I thought, is excommunication. So there's a picture. This is a picture of the Pope actually excommunicating Frederick II, I think. not a lot of pictures about excommunication. People don't do a lot of paintings about that. And certainly, I couldn't find any pictures of a church disciplinary council, because of course they're secret, and they're and they're not things that we want to celebrate. We don't celebrate excommunication. We kind of brush it under the table as this thing, this necessary evil. But it actually has a huge mechanism to do those same things that we talked about before, comply, conform, so, and these are based around these high ideas of inclusion and exclusion, like who's in, who's out, who gets resources, who doesn't. The early days of the United Order was the idea that you consecrated all to the church, and then if you decided to leave, you left on your own. There wasn't any payout. It wasn't like, oh, you gave 1/10 of the stuff. Now that you're leaving, you get 1/10 back. No, the Revelation says, if you leave, then you forfeit those resources. Now we're fortunate in the church that generally people's economic well-being is not attached to their membership and their standing, except
unless you work for the church.
If you
work for the church, it is.
It is, and of course we see that, right? That idea that, that's a really tough place to be, and I know you've been there, Rebecca. So
I was really triggered this week because somebody posted a kind of a leaked letter to unit leaders, which would be a bishop or a branch president. It was from the HR legal department of the church, and it basically gave the names in that unit of the people that worked for the church. And it said, please let us know if they do not have a current temple recommend. You don't need to tell us why. You also need to say, are they likely to have one within 90 days? So they're actively asking leaders to get back to them and let them know, if there's a person that may not have a temple recommend, and then they're going to have to look into that. So I mean, anyone who works for the church is aware of that, and everyone thinks, oh, that's not a problem until it is a problem, right? You never know how you're going to feel sometimes, or deconstruct or go down a rabbit hole, and then you really are in trouble. But yeah, that still exists today, the inclusion, the exclusion. Absolutely.
Look, and I know people who have, it's devastating in that case. And generally the church is not like that, but for the employees, it's absolutely like that. And there are a number of religions, of course, where it's like that for every person anyway, right? It's a communal kind of a system. And if you leave with nothing. It probably might have been your employment. It's probably your economic base. It might even be your accommodation. So, that's a very abusive space to be in. And look, to be fair, that's a space that many women have been in throughout history, where if they chose to leave a marriage, they might forfeit their children. They certainly might not have had a job. Their economy, and so effectively you're trapped. And for many of the early saints, they were trapped. When you fled Kirtland to be with Joseph in far west Missouri in 1838, you went there as a refugee. And so, the idea that you might not agree with what's going on in 1838, whether there's a Mormon Missouri War, this meant either, it meant ostracized space. It meant being cast out. It meant being shunned. It meant no resources. It meant not eating. It meant starving. Right? These are not trivial things. They're massive, and so these kinds of mechanisms, and particularly excommunication, was utilized to protect Joseph, and also silence concerns the real concerns that people had about what was going on. And I just had listed a few of these down here, and these names are very infamous in Mormon circles, of course. But Emma Smith, I mean, look, if you look at Doctrine and Covenants section 25 as a hailing of Emma as an elect lady, which it is, there's a lot of kudos to Emma. But if you start to read under the lines and realize that she's being directed by God potentially through Joseph, to be quiet about some things, like don't murmur because you haven't been able to be a witness of the golden plates, or that your responsibility is to look after your husband Joseph and make sure that all of his needs are being met. You start to see that actually parts of those are well, if you don't comply, this is going to be a big deal. And of course, this becomes section 132 later on, where it is a big deal because it says, Emma, if you don't comply, you will be destroyed. And women who don't comply, like you, are also going to be destroyed. And so, this is a really frightening mechanism to control. So, and then there were others, of course, is Duke Booth, Sylvester in 1831, Sylvester Smith in 1834, Warren Parrish in 1837, Oliver Cowdery, and of course Martin Harris and David Whitmer in 1838, Thomas B. Marsh in 1839, John C. Bennett in 1842, and William Law in 1844. So these people all excommunicated because they spoke up against Joseph and what was going on in the moment that they disagreed in, they just couldn't comply with. And of course, part of silencing them was to, Joseph tried to reconcile, and many people he did reconcile with, but these got to a point where he goes, well, you're not supporting me, you're out. And that excommunication provided that mechanism of othering, that you could go, this person is not, their voice and their concerns are not worthy of consideration anymore, and you don't have to listen to them. So these are Sylvester Smith is really interesting because he after Zion's camp, he's like, that was a waste of time, and this is and also Joseph did these terrible things along the way, violence again, what people told them he was going to kill them, it's pretty tense time. Sylvester Smith recounted all of this afterwards, and basically the High Council said, look, you need to pull your head in, support Joseph or else. And they made him sign an affidavit basically saying, it was all my fault, Joseph was in the right, it's all good. And Sylvester Smith later wrote down he was forced to sign that. So yeah, just fascinating. And we all know people who have been silenced in one way or another, and excommunication is only one mechanism for that silencing. But it's being cut off in your voice is is a form of violence. It's a form of coercion and compliance, which is it's fascinating, and of course it has real world implications for lots of people.
Fascinating and devastating. What are your thoughts, Darren, on that as a mechanism? I mean, it's pervasive.
I mean, it works.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does.
Is it the right way? You mentioned Sylvester Smith. I used to just blow these people off because they were apostates. But if you read the story behind Ezra Booth, it's fascinating. His like Sylvester Smith, he was disgruntled by the trip to Missouri, and he was convinced that this is Zion and there's going to be all these great things. And the journey is horrible, and he gets there and there's nothing. And he's like, this just for saying, hey, wait a minute, this isn't what we were promised with the prophecy. And he's ousted and frowned upon for that. And then some sections of the Satan on the waters thing comes out of that I never understood. So the history behind that's incredible. Thomas B. Marsh as well. If you read his real concerns and why he was excommunicated versus the story we're told, it's drastically different. So it's interesting. But I have a really close friend who was excommunicated years ago, and it ruined his faith. He told me several times, had I not been excommunicated, I would probably be a bishop, a stake president. And he's a very charismatic leader, a great person. And he got embittered. And then as he saw more and more people, as years went by, not get excommunicated for doing things of a lesser transgression, he's like, what? Where's the equality or the fairness in this? And so, Yeah, it's a rough thing, I think, and it depends maybe who your bishop or stake president is at the moment as to what happens to you. And I've heard recently it's getting less and less, severe, more forgiving than it was years ago. And so this has been a bitter thing with him, and it's sad. He's a good friend of mine, and it's causing him a lot of angst in his life and his family's life.
And it's very definite too, right? You're an enemy if you're excommunicated, right? Especially if you're excommunicated because you're for apostasy, right? It's
Right.
this marks you. It's your scarlet letter that says, "Don't talk to that person. That person's not of any value whatsoever."
And I've been in a bishopric, and we've been through those, and the handbook that says this is a blessing to the person, and blah blah blah, and I think the intent is that nowadays, but if it happened to me, I don't know how I would take it. I don't know how you can take it positively, but anyway, it's a tough deal. It is.
Mm.
This is so arbitrary. I mean, the recent interview with Lori Vallow, she says, I believe I'm still a member of the church. I haven't been notified that I'm not. We know that Chad Daybell was notified, that he was having a court there. We haven't found any documentation on that. Can you imagine if she is not an excommunicated person and someone like Nemo is? I mean, where is the rhyme or reason in any of it?
Yeah, and it's all well. It's really about compliance, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so well in this particular instance, I think there are some really, I'm not against excommunication per se. There's certainly some things that I think should definitely exclude somebody, and it should be notified to people that they are a problem. Sexual violence, abuse of children. These are things that I think should be notified and excommunicated, and people should be aware. And I've seen some terrible situations where people who have done some horrific things have been either excommunicated, then rebaptized relatively, quickly, and or where they haven't been disciplined at all, or seemingly, not when their victims, suffer horrific ongoing, ramifications for their actions. So this is just, really hard.
It does seem to be who you know, right? It seems like if you're high profile or you have some ins or some clout, that maybe you don't get the discipline that you should. But remember how they used to put the names of excommunicated people in the newspaper, right? Like in the Deseret News, I think, century ago. And when I was a kid, they used to say them out loud in priesthood meeting. I have a memory where priesthood meeting was in the chapel in my ward when I was very little, and I was in primary and I had to use the restroom. So I figured I would just cut through the back of the chapel. That was the fastest way to get to the restroom. And I shouldn't have, I guess I didn't realize priesthood meeting was going on, very serious. But as I opened the door and walked through, I heard them say one of my friend's dad's name and said, Brother so-and-so has been excommunicated. So he is not to be asked to pray or to, and I just remember going, I knew it was something very bad, but yeah, they used to announce it pretty publicly.
Yeah, very fraught as a mechanism, and hard to apply properly. Oh, and Joseph used it as a mechanism for control. So this just continued to be the case throughout the history of his life, but also a legacy that became a big part of Mormon history. And of course, John Krakauer talks about that because, of course, in Utah particularly, if you're a Gentile or an apostate, your life wasn't worth anything. So actually, it could mean your death. And there were people who were looking to leave Utah, and who if you did that under the cover of night without anybody knowing, because if anybody knew, you would be attacked by the Indians. That would be how you lost your life on your way out. And we know from accounts, that this, excommunication or apostasy, its sign of apostasy, might mean your actual physical death. Particularly in Utah under Brigham Young. So So yeah, while it didn't necessarily mean that in Joseph's time, there was certainly a number of people who feared for their life, right? Sidney Rigdon on, I think it was June the 7th, gave the Salt Sermon, which basically said the dissenters in Far West needed to get out or their lives would be forfeit. And that was Oliver Cowdery and David Whitmer and others of the Whitmers. So they left believing that they might be killed. William Law complained to the High Council in Nauvoo that Joseph's lack of confidence in him, that he'd put the secret police on to actually get rid of him. So these are things that were a part of that. It's this excommunication in some instances, apostasy in some instances might mean your jeopardy of your life. So that's a really big violence. All right, secrecy and death oaths. Woohoo! Well,
now
this
it gets
picture
exciting,
here,
right?
oh, this is this is where the rubber hits the road here.
Oh my goodness.
In essence, this is the case because this is where the individual member ends up either pantomiming violence or kind of suggesting that they would be subject to violence if their views changed. This picture I've got here is the Masonic apron of Joseph Smith, and you can go see this on the Joseph Smith Papers Project. And this is his actual apron. So, not green, or maybe it's faded so much now that it lost its color. But the idea that aprons were part of Masonic life, and that then transferred through to, of course, the endowment. But a lot of this had to do with the idea of hidden knowledge. Joseph's magic worldview involved parchments. It involved this idea that there was hidden understandings of the esoteric world that would be revealed to the faithful if they practiced in a particular way. And so Joseph Smith's dad was most likely a Mason. We're not quite sure, but certainly Hiram, his brother, was a Mason. And of course, in the latter part of the 1820s, William Morgan, who was exposing the order's secrets, he was abducted and never seen of again, so presumed murdered. And so there was that whole anti-Mason rhetoric that was like neighboring the Smith store. Canandaigua, where William Morgan was abducted from, is the county seat. It's 10 miles from Joseph's door. This was played out in the news. This meant a whole political party dedicated to anti-Masonic ideas. This was a big part of the Book of Mormon, the secret combinations for these oath-bound societies that were undermining the government of the United States and were an existential threat. This was a big part of the milieu that ended up with a lot of anti-Gadianton Roberts sentiment in the Book of Mormon.
And then Morgan's widow married Joseph. Yes. So that's an interesting connection. And, I'm just looking at this apron. I just have to interject. I wonder if your typical active LDS person knows that this was Joseph's apron. You cannot look at this without recognizing the overwhelming influence of folk magic, the occult. There is no way that you can look at this with not understanding. But I mean, what do you think, Darren? Do you think your standard member would recognize this as Joseph's apron?
No, I don't think so. It's very interesting. Yeah. Yeah.
It's shocking to me. I mean, I've seen it, but not such a clear picture as this. I just think this should be more widely publicized, because how would they explain it?
Well, most people don't even know that Joseph was a Mason, and that he was a Mason right through to, from 1842 when he took out, the orders of Masonry, right through to his death. Like, it wasn't that he, I think most members might, if they understand a Mason connection, might believe that he investigated Masonry and then, came to the temple endowment from it, and basically, superseded Masonry with the temple endowment. But that's not the case. Joseph operated the temple endowment, yes, on the basis of Masonry, yes, but Joseph was a practicing Mason the whole of the rest of his life, right through to 1844. You can read his journals. He went to lodge meetings all the time. This was the big thing of the day. All of those guys, because it was all men, right, did this. They were Masons and they were Mormons. They were out every night, either at a lodge meeting or a church meeting. This is just what they were doing. So Masonry was a huge part of Joseph's latter life, but the ideas of protection and threats of violence started early on in the 1830s, where those people who weren't complying were deemed to be threats, and the ideas that violence might be carried against you was a big part of that. That's Grandison Newell in 1837. He brought a court case against Joseph for conspiring to kill him. The Danites in 1838, of course, these were the enforcers, but these were also those who ended up, attacking nearby communities and looting their goods. Joseph joined Masonry in 1842 with Sidney Rigdon, but that was probably on the advice of his brother Hiram and also John C. Bennett, who were big into Masonry at the time. And then Joseph implemented lots of the Masonry symbols and ceremonies and into the church endowment, including the death oaths. So these are the penalties associated with revealing these secrets. So the secret keeping is a big part of Masonry, and that was a big part of, covering over polygamy, and these existed in the temple rites right through to 1990. So if you went to the temple prior to 1991, you participated in the idea that you would slit your throat or your chest or your bowels, or have your heart ripped out of its chest. These are very violent images that you pantomimed by these signs and tokens in the temple, so that you would know that these things were so sacred that and so special that if you did not keep them secret, you had effectively given permission to others to take your life. And of course, this was played out in Utah with the idea of blood atonement, but it's a big part of the temple ceremony, and was up until it was dropped in 1990.
Yeah, I just barely missed it because I went through in 91. But when I found out what it was, I just couldn't even look at my parents and my grandparents in the same way, because I thought your whole life you've been okay with this. You've been okay doing this. And I know Landon, my co-host, who's not here right now, he said when he went through, he was extremely disturbed by that, and just kind of looked over at his parents, and they're like, It really, I don't think that you can describe unless you've gone through it. And like I said, I haven't. It's so disturbing on just a subconscious level and an emotional level and a spiritual level. And I think about everyone that goes through now, there are remnants of those symbols. We're holding the thumb a certain way, cupping your intestines as they all fall out. Do people even know that's what it means? It's highly disturbing. Did you ever wonder, Darren, when you were going through the temple? I mean, did you know what it meant? Did you have any idea?
No, I just missed it, like both of you as well.
Yeah.
It definitely heard, And yeah, it's kind of shocking to think of that. And that, yeah, I look at my parents and my mom,
Yeah,
who
don't you?
my mom wouldn't hurt a mosquito, and to
Exactly.
imagine her doing that is just,
Yeah,
yeah, just kind of crazy.
yeah.
I think about this in terms of its compliance possibilities, right? If you get somebody to, pantomime slitting their own
Mhm,
throat,
mhm,
their sacred covenants are underpinned by violence.
mhm.
Um, you get a huge hold over them, all right? Because how do you justify that to yourself? Well, you justify it to yourself of, this is really important. I must keep on with it, and if I don't, my my life is forfeit because I won't be faithful. I won't be, like, it's actually incredibly coercive. I mean, the one good news for all three of us, I suppose, is we can talk about this because it wasn't a part of our endowment
Right.
ceremony. So therefore, like, actually, I didn't make any covenants to keep this part secret.
You trying to say we're off the hook? No, and I know I've a lot of faithful social media. I'm always looking around. There are some people don't believe that those even existed. They're asking for proof. Where is that? That's not real. So it's interesting. We need to keep talking about it and let people know that that exists. But I'll go back to my metaphor of the sleeper cell. This kind of oath with underpinned with violence, like you said it so well, it does create a sleeper cell. And I don't think we see violence in the mainstream church today, but we see everybody getting behind Prop 8, whether they want to or not. They've taken an oath, and so they're going to donate all this money. They're going to actively campaign because the church has told them to, or get behind, building a temple and the steeple doctrine. The church has told them this, how they're supposed to feel. They've taken an oath. It's kind of like, a sleeper cell activating. Oh, it's my turn. I'm up to the plate. I'm up to bat. I need to do what they're asking me to do, And of
Oh yeah,
course, we have stories in our past of people that did incredible things that we can never, recreate. We can't suffer like the pioneers suffered. We can't give up everything like they did. We can't do that. So these other things, it's like we're up to the plate, and I've told the story before about Prop 8 in California, where the LDS Church got involved with soliciting donations through the church, given to a third party, but still trying to manipulate what was happening with same-sex marriage in California. And in my ward in California, I was in Relief Society, and they said, sisters, we have the opportunity to take a bus. We've chartered it down to LA. People are picketing the temple. They're threatening the temple there because of our involvement in Prop 8. And we'd like the sisters, half of the day you're going to lay in the road to protect the temple so no one can drive up to it. And the other
wow.
half of the day, you're going to go out and canvass. And I literally laughed out loud. I went, and there was another woman next to me. We were both laughing. And then we looked around and everybody was, yes, yes. I've got, they were signing up. They were going to get on the bus. They were activated. It was their turn up to bat, and that's when I kind of realized it was a pivotal moment for me where I went, oh, I am nothing like these people. I don't believe like they believe. I'm not going to do what they do, So that's an example of getting involved politically. But, in the past, it was violent. Look at the Mountain Meadows Massacre. Look what people were called up to do, like my ancestor that was a pivotal player in that. So I don't know. I'm on a soapbox about the sleeper cell, but that's really how I feel.
Well, this is an important piece of the sleeper cell, right? It's the
Yeah.
death oaths. Once you've done that, what else is there
What else? Yeah.
more that you could do to
Yeah.
signify your loyalty and your ability to go, well, my life is not worth it, anything unless I'm willing to follow through with these particular covenants.
Yeah.
And look, these were active in Joseph's day. The Danites took an oath of, that they would be killed if they weren't loyal. Of course, there were the oaths in the temple endowment ceremony that did that too. And then in the Council of 50 Minutes, there are the members took oaths that they would, forfeit their heads if they revealed the secrets of the Council of 50 Minutes. And of course, after Joseph was killed, Brigham Young enacted the Oath of Vengeance in the temple that stood through to 1912. The idea that you would take vengeance out on the United States for their treatment of Joseph and Hiram. These acts of committing to violence. I mean, it's just it's just verbally, of course, because for the vast majority of people, this never actually ended up in any form of violence. Mormons were the pillars of American society, and these are the people next door who are the best people ever. So the idea that those people next door to you will have taken an oath, a death oath, as part of their most sacred ceremonies in the temple is frightening.
No, it is. It's terrifying. And where you can see it in modern days is temple building. In all these cities that Mormonish follows, where there's the zoning and there's residents that say, no, we've got to work this out. They all say the same thing back to us. They say, I thought I knew my Mormon neighbor. They were just really nice, normal. All of a sudden, they're calling me a religious bigot. They're, stealing my yard signs. They're activated for the church, for the cause of the temple. They're telling me they've always known the steeple has to be a certain height. They are activated. And all these other residents who are not LDS are going, who are these people? I'm telling you, across the board, everybody says that because everyone has been called up to support and defend the temple, just like in the olden days. It's really interesting to watch.
Sorry, Darren.
Yeah, go ahead.
No,
Darren.
I was just going to make mention in the book, you point out things that are very obvious once you point it out. But before you did, I was like, oh my gosh, I never realized that. Like the Book of Mormon teaches anti-secret societies. This will be the overthrow of the people, and then here we are. It's being implemented in the church, in the temple. They preach against fine sanctuaries and beautiful buildings, and you just need to be humble to worship God. And then there's these $50 million temples being built everywhere. And then you have, the anti-polygamy, Jacob going on of how bad that is, and these abominations that Solomon and David participated in. And then you've got polygamy being introduced in Nauvoo. So it's almost like the Book of Mormon was written one way, and then to foreshadow the opposite that's going to happen later. It's baffling.
I feel like that's a podcast called Do As I Say, Not As I Do, right? Let's bring up all those examples. Put it on the back burner, Ganesh. Let's do it.
We'll do that. Oh, look, and because I did go through the temple prior to 1991, I have no qualms in the book of sharing all of those pre-1990 excerpts of the death oaths in my book against the Masonic death oaths that are also exactly the same. All right. Okay. Well, this is part of also another form of violence, I think, and that is demonizing others, because like we talked about at the beginning, the idea that there are these evil others, and we have to protect ourselves against them. And when they are objecting to what we're doing, it's persecution. This is a major underpinning of Joseph's life and how the church played out. And of course, we see this we see this in Joseph Smith's first vision, the canonized version, right? That God says all of their creeds are an abomination, all of their learnings and understanding. I can't remember the exact words, but God's unequivocal in his denunciation of other religions in the first vision that we have canonized, the 1838 version. And this becomes the underpinning of the way that we treat other people's beliefs. In fact, also prior to 1990, so none of us went through it, they had a character in the temple endowment ceremony called the preacher, who was representative of these satanic churches. And there's a whole dialogue between the preacher and Satan, in which case, the preacher is effectively the minion of Satan. And I also document that in the book too, so you can go and have a look at how that was represented, because it never happened to me, because when I went through the temple, there was no such character. So there wasn't one for you, Darren or Rebecca. But
I'm sure in the chat there may be some people that are like, yes, I remember that. And then think about the Catholic Church, the horror of the earth, the abominable. I mean, and that's why I think those of us that are older and remember all of this and the warnings against Christianity and other religions, just watching the church align itself with mainstream Christianity and say, we've always been fine with it. We've always liked crosses. We've always liked gospel music. We've always been fine. We're just left shaking our head because that is not how we were raised. Those were false traditions. Those were incorrect doctrines. They were dangerous. They were the horror of the earth. And now, let's just be best friends. So, I mean, it's really interesting to see them try to dial that back and portray themselves as mainstream Christians.
I was just reading through the first vision account of Joseph Smith's words in 1838, saying I think he says all three times, all religions, all creeds, all, and that's like everyone on the earth, right? And all creeds, I mean, a Christian creed was love your neighbor. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, is that an abomination? So I think he kind of gets carried away there with everything that he's saying to prove his point. But really, there's a lot of Christian creeds that are great. They're exactly the teachings of Jesus. So,
yeah. I think I've seen evidences that they are trying to sort of distance themselves from the phrase the only true church. They're going to have to if they're going to align themselves with mainstream Christianity. So, but I mean, we were all raised with that. It is, like you said, the only true church. All others, they may have a little something here or there that's okay, but no. And I think they're going to have to dial back that concept and distance themselves a little bit. And I already kind of see it a little bit in order to not offend all the rest of mainstream Christianity, right? That they're trying to align themselves with.
Well, but that's Doctrine and Covenants section 1,
Exactly.
This church for whom the Lord is pleased, the one and only true church on the face of the earth. This is canonized in our scripture. So
they left out teeny tiny, the one and only teeny tiny church left.
Yeah, but this idea of demonizing others is massive because, of course, Joseph was doing a lot of things which he was getting pushback for, right? Darren mentioned the first one at the beginning was, he sent missionaries through to Indian territory to teach them, and then they were getting pushback. They were, the Indian agents there said, "What are you doing here? You don't have permits. You have to leave." So then they went to Jackson County, and then the Jackson County people go, "Hang on a second, what are you religious zealots doing here?" Well, this is according to Revelation, this is the promised land, and we own this land, and therefore you're going to have to forfeit it to us. And they were like, "What? Who are you?" And kicked them out. So, and everybody. So Joseph was kept infringing on other people, and when they pushed back, then he just claimed that they were persecuting him religiously, or persecuting the saints, or their freedom of religion was being squashed, and this is still being done today. Even with the steeple. Why? As you rightly point out, Rebecca. The church is being persecuted because it's not allowed a huge steeple. But
no, and the poor people are just saying, no, we're just talking about zoning. It has nothing to do with religion. No, you're a religious bigot. Yeah, you can see it in real time playing out. It's so interesting.
And so then the church has a ton of enemies because they just don't treat everybody else like they want to be treated, and so then counties. Local cities, communities, states, even state governments. I mean, Joseph spent a lot of time once, just denouncing Missouri and suggesting that Missouri should be wasted. He even wrote a letter to the Green Mountain Boys in New England to get them to come and help him, lay waste to the state of Missouri because they were so evil, because they didn't want these religious zealots pouring into them, changing their constitution and community makeups. Now, did Missouri act well? Oh, gosh, there are a lot of debates there, but the ways that Joseph treated Missouri were horrific, And then, of course, the United States. The United States didn't uphold their reparations, and therefore the United States became a threat. The whole reason for the Council of 50 was basically a theocratic government. These were the cabinet ministers of Joseph's new theocracy, and part of the Council of 50 was effectively, supplanting the United States. They were going to, Joseph was going to run for president. This was going to be his cabinet. This was going to be how Mormons overthrew the government and restored it to a theocracy. Well, they believed that this was now allowed because, Joseph and the church were representing Jesus. So these are the kinds of things that people push back against. Of course, when they pushed back, that was deemed to be persecution. And of course, the greatest persecution was the martyrdom and death of Joseph and Hiram, which cemented the ideas that the United States was not a safe place to be. So Brigham Young sought to leave, but also that, righteous people are always going to suffer at the hands of, this unruly, unrighteous, wicked people that God is going to destroy, and we should, make plans to fight. So, and look, I put this picture of the Tree of Life and Lehi's vision because it really suggests that divide of, here is the great and spacious pride of the world who are mocking us and demonizing us, but actually the story is saying that they are the demons, that they are the people that are wicked, and it just becomes an us versus them scenario rather than these are actual real other humans trying to do their best, living hopefully with integrity and trying to bless their communities and be working in harmony and peace with people who are not always exactly the same as them. So this demonizing others as an underpinning of the way that Joseph related to the people around him and the government agencies, local officials, law providers, it sowed these seeds of distrust that ended up with huge amounts of violence. Really, really tricky, really problematic. And then the last one that I just want to talk about was, what's the next step? Well, the next step is war, militarization and warfare, right? Because Joseph designated that these particular spaces were deemed by God to be their new inheritance, and as entitled righteous, those who were already there were the wicked who needed to be swept aside. And so this, of course, ended up in the expulsion from Jackson County in 1833, and then Joseph, formed an army, and marched them across from Ohio through to Missouri, and what was the Camp of Israel, which was then renamed Zion's Camp in 1834. And this was a military operation. The coined term, a Book of Mormon in one hand and a musket in the other, is from Zion's Camp. It's, this was a military endeavor. Joseph was the general. They were going to fight, and this Governor Duncan, who was the current governor of Missouri at the time, this was being reported as these saints were moving across the country. It became went from being a freedom activity to being an act of aggression. Governor Duncan, one of the reasons he didn't help them was he believed that this would incite civil war in Missouri. And fortunately, Joseph was smart enough, or maybe just understood that he didn't have the power to do it, but he disbanded the people, basically saying, go home, what you've done is fine, Zion will be redeemed in the future by God. But it was an act of war, and it was seen as an act of war by the people of Missouri, and it almost came to that. There were deaths, early on in that Jackson expulsion. But fortunately, the only deaths from Zion's camp were cholera outbreaks that, for some reason, the Lord saw fit to put upon them after they finished. So yeah, really interesting that Joseph. This was one of the points at which Joseph was inciting civil war as early as 1834, although there'd been a lot of rhetoric even prior to this. And then we see that again in the Mormon-Missouri War of 1838. This pitted, the Danites and Mormon militia against, other militia groups in Missouri, and then, of course, the state forces. And Joseph Hiram and Sidney and others were arrested and jailed for treason, and they were kept in Liberty Jail, where they escaped during a prisoner relocation. So they never, and of course by this point this had become a big embarrassment. So Missouri didn't really pursue that until the 1840s when Joseph started, lashing out at Missouri, and then they looked to try and extricate it and extradite him from Illinois, and that caused a whole lot of increasingly violent rhetoric from Joseph against Missouri, which was a big part of the 1843, and then in 1844 with the Nauvoo Legion. The Nauvoo Legion was this massive force that Joseph had enabled in Nauvoo, and part of the destruction of the printing press, William Law's printing press, was martial law, and that again brought the state of Illinois to the brink of civil war, according to Governor Thomas Ford. And again, Joseph and Hiram are jailed for treason. So these are massive deals. The whole Nauvoo Legion thing, was just supposed to just give them an idea of safety, because they had been driven out of Missouri. The people of Illinois were very compassionate to them, and Joseph took that and became the lieutenant general, and formed an army that worried all of the towns around, and certainly worried people in Missouri. So this is massive. Anything you want to say about warfare, or anything that
I just think, was there any other religion that wherever they went, just total chaos and civil war threat followed? I mean, they were just everywhere they went, this happened. I mean, that should be a wake-up call to anybody. There's no other religion where this kind of violence followed them around, I don't think.
No, and that's what makes Mormonism so interesting, of course.
Exactly.
This happened, of course, in Utah. Brigham Young did this in Utah. There's the Utah War with the government of the United States, and the casualties of those are particularly the Mountain Meadows Massacre. So, this is ongoing through Mormon history. And it's fascinating. It's also kind of scary, and somebody who comes from New Zealand, which is a bit pacifist down here at the bottom of the world, where we don't have to worry about threats. This was a major issue for me when I discovered that this was the case, because I thought, gosh, we were so persecuted because we were just so peaceful and so righteous. No, that's not the case at all.
Yeah, until you think of it, being in other shoes. If someone moves into my neighborhood and says, well, I've been promised this land, and this is chosen, for me and my friends, and we've got thousands of people moving in and deal with it, and we're going to, take over, and you don't think of it that way. I'd dig in too and fight back. I wouldn't just say, okay, I'll leave and you can have it. It's just, I've never looked at it from that viewpoint before. So I understand, what these people were going through everywhere, Missouri and Kirtland and, Illinois and, and then Native Americans in Utah. Exactly.
Yeah, I think you eventually realize, and I thought about this exactly what you said. If somebody moved into my cul-de-sac and we're doing the, breaking the ethical moral code, polygamy, and all the kind of stuff that was happening, counterfeiting and treason, I would be the mob. Every decent person that I knew in my cul-de-sac would become the mob, right? But that's very pervasive in Mormon history, just the mob. Who is the mob? And I think maybe, who did I do this episode with? Maybe it was Ganesh. I don't know, but we talked about the makeup of the mob. These were upstanding citizens of the area, right? So it's pretty interesting. If you want to see a modern day example of this, there's a documentary on Netflix called Wild Wild Country, and it's about in the 80s a town in Oregon where a cult from India moved in and took over, the Rajneeshi, and that's exactly it. They said we're supposed to be here. They had a very different moral code from everybody there. They took over city government, and eventually all the citizens, where they had landed, had to kind of get out or get on board. And it's really interesting. It's pretty fascinating. Everybody look that up.
Yeah, when I watch that, you could just get such an understanding of how some of these poor people. I mean, look, these people weren't innocent, right? Jackson County wasn't innocent. The people in Caldwell County and Davis County weren't innocent, but you can just understand. I would say about the Rajneeshis that they did have one redeeming feature, and that's that they were extremely good looking because they were Indian. So
that was it. And they were into free love all over the town.
Oh, yeah.
It's so funny, the scenes with the people, the old timers, they're like, and you got the Rajneeshi all over town doing their stuff, very polyamorous. Kind of gives you an idea when somebody comes in and they have a different, ethical, moral code, which might be seen as immoral. Yeah, it's a recipe for disaster. Let's just say that.
And I didn't cover this in these slides, but but it happened to Oregon, right? When these people came in, they overwhelmed the polls. They had more, and they voted as a bloc, and so they could change the area significantly in their favor, which is exactly what happened to these places when Joseph commanded a gathering, right? It just completely changed the political makeup and enabled Joseph to do some extreme things that were horrific, that undermined the Constitution for these people in these areas. So it was, the political underpinning of this militarization of warfare is really interesting. One of the distinctions.
Some people say that had he kind of, he had that block vote, right? And he would promise it to kind of either side or all around. If he would have, gotten behind one thing and stuck to it, perhaps he would have been protected. But he knew he had that block vote, and he was sort of alluding to, well, we'll follow you, or no, we'll follow you. So he never had protection from anybody, from any side, any party, because he was just using it to his advantage.
Really, really tricky. And the flip side that I make in the book, actually, which I find fascinating, is this kind of protection that Joseph was gunning for, to use a pun. He didn't advocate it for other people, right? Because the Native Americans, he was telling them to, lay down their weapons of war, to bury their hatchets, to make peace with their neighbors, And so there's a whole lot of pacification and disarmament that is talked about in the Book of Mormon for brown people, and also that carried through to Joseph's advice to native peoples when they asked for his help. He's not going to help them, but they should stop their warring ways. His militarization and his warfare was for him and his group, not for other people who might feel marginalized or concerned. So, he did not apply this fairly across the board. He was, gunning for his own ideas and agendas at the expense of other people, not, because he felt like this was unfair for everyone. Okay, so, and then the last bit I just wanted to talk about in terms of this militarization and war is, the martyrdom. we describe it as this major persecution coming to a head, and Joseph being died. We don't think about it as the mob being actually vigilante justice, because they don't think that the general courts system is equipped to deal with somebody like Joseph, who manages to utilize it for political endeavor, or just manages to evade the law through some kind of technical out. And of course, one of this picture of the muskets, which the pistols, which you can see in the Church History Library in Salt Lake, or you can go on to the Joseph Smith Paper Project, and this is where I've grabbed this picture from. These are the guns that Joseph and Hiram had on them that were smuggled into the jail in Carthage that they used against the mob. So this is not a lamb going to the slaughter. These guys were not planning to die. They were absolutely fighting back this, they were interested in asserting their dominance. But of course, you can, the truth should not get in the way of a good story. And the martyrdom is a great story of persecution brought to its ultimate end, which is these great leaders who have sacrificed everything on behalf of their testimonies. So, yeah.
I'm pretty sure he would have run it into the ground, the church, had he not been killed. If he would have lived, I think we would not be where we are right now on this podcast today. I think it would have gotten crazier and I think it would have jumped the shark eventually, and people just would have said, okay, that's enough.
Well, yeah, it was definitely getting more and more extreme by June of 1844.
Mm-hmm.
So many things came to a head that that's my only rationale for the idea that Joseph potentially could have been murdered from the inside, was that people just saw him. Even his friends might have seen him as our liability. Yep. They were his friends. It wasn't that they secretly conspired against him, but I could see how they might think, gosh, if this is he's now causing us safety issues, which means that he has to forfeit. But that actually is a part of the whole thing that Joseph set up. He set up all of these mechanisms of violence because they were about his preservation. And when other people realized that their lives were at stake, that's when they often changed and fought against him. So it's a really interesting dynamic, and it's just such a fascinating part of Mormon history. This whole part of Joseph's life, which was underpinned by violence, and the ways that he utilized violence in his mechanism, and of course how that then went on to provide for the Utah period, and also nowadays with things like Laurie Daybell, Chad Daybell, and John Krakauer's book, and all the Lafley brothers, and everything. These are underpinnings of violence that can be traced back to the way that Joseph sowed that in the mechanisms of compliance in the church. So that's tricky.
And that's just one section of the book. That's just one topic. That's what I mean. You can read this straight through, or you can pick and choose. And no, this has just been wonderful. Darren, any final thoughts from you on just this particular topic? Had you gotten to this section in the book yet, or are you still making your way?
No, I haven't read this section. Like you said, you can, take a topic or a subtopic of a section and just skip right to that if you want to, and you're not missing anything. It's not like, I just read something towards the end and I spoiled the rest of the story. You can jump around, and which I really like. You may want to focus on something one day because of whatever was on your mind, but I like that. But no, like I said, I think it plugs in a lot of pieces for me, or it has, of just some of these things in my mind that I've been struggling with. Why is this? How is this? What caused this? And when we see the full picture, it just kind of brings that all into focus. And I think Ganesh has done a great job. And uh, questions here. You say I do have one, Ganesh. How long have you been working on this?
Oh dear.
It's got to been a long time.
So this 4 years. I thought it would be done in, I naively thought it would be done in, a little while, because things just kept coming and coming so quickly, and you thought, oh gosh, it's easy. But then you realize, A, you have to quantify what is actually going on. B, you have to give a background of how these things ended up being the issue. And of course, um, I was really conscious that I wanted it to be accurate but also useful. So then, talking and having people review bits and pieces of it, so that to make sure that I wasn't kind of just inventing these things in my head. Those just took a long, long time, much, much longer than I ever expected. And so it's nice to have it in a form where people can actually utilize it. But even now, I know that there are things that are wrong in it, or at least things that could be better. But it's just that at least I put a mark in time, and in the book I've put my email address specifically for this commenting, so that if people find things, or they disagree with things, or they find additional things that would enhance various chapters, we could this day and age, it's easy to put another edition out and make adjustments, and so that this could be a bit of a reference point. I would suggest that actually, this idea of violence is not a section in this book. What we've just done today is not a section in this book.
Oh, it's not. Okay.
Yeah, I was going
I
to say,
thought it was a topic.
I
Okay.
haven't got to that one yet.
Ah.
No, it's not a section, because it's not it's a theme that underpins a number of the different chapters across all the sections. So I've when I'm talking about Native Americans, I've got a whole section on Native Americans, and when I talk about beginnings of America, there's a whole section on that. But the idea of violence, it permeates a number of different issues in Joseph's life. I'm just bringing them together in that particular theme, and it, and like, yeah, there are a number of things, but the violence is one of those ones that I think is a really important one, because it's so fascinating, but also it just is, it's the water that a lot of what we are swimming in is happening, and we're unaware of it until it breaks out in these really crazy spaces, like Mark Hoffman's bombings, or the Lafferty's murders, or the Mountain Meadows massacre, or these things are breakouts because all of the things are set in motion, and it's almost like there's these powder kegs that with the right conditions will just turn into a massive storm. So or a massive explosion, and violence is just one of them. And I love your idea, Rebecca, about sleeper cells, because I never described it like that, but that's exactly what they are. We have been programmed with this internal act, or these internal acts of violence, and at some point we set off. And some people are set off with the idea of, oh gosh, I'm going to fight against it, like you talked about, Darren, with your friend who was excommunicated. Suddenly, hang on, I'm now being persecuted for doing the thing that I thought was right, or if even if it is wrong, it's small in comparison to what other people get wrong. Like these kinds of things are the linchpin, or maybe it's the violence that happens with regard to our LGBTQ members, or and when that's your own children, and suddenly there's people are telling them that they're wicked or evil or terrible. What is it? The violence that was perpetrated against Black people to say that they were unrighteous in the pre-existence? Was it the violence that Native peoples across the world have been told that they were fallen, Israelites who are now incur the wrath of God? These are all forms of violence. Or is it the violence that God is going to strike you down because you haven't done your duty exactly, or you've revealed your tokens? Like one thing I will say from the temple, that whole line, if they do not work up to every, covenant in this place, they will be in my power. This is violence that we will incur if we don't conform, if we are not loyal, if we do not, say that this is the best thing ever, when actually it's causing us harm or marginalizing the people we love. So these things I find incredibly problematic, but really useful if we understand what's going on and we call it out and we suggest that it's accountable. I'm likely to face some form of church discipline because of this book. That's a form of violence. Excommunication is a form of violence. My stake president's already had a go at me. So I feel like
recently your stake president has over the book,
yeah,
or
just last week. Yeah. So
really,
and and not just him, his first counselor, who was and these people I love, right? These are people who I know well, who know me really well. And I think it's incredibly weird and actually wholly problematic that their loyalty to a guy 200 years ago is such that they will rage at me when they know how kind I am, that I've done incredible things for their families, that they've known me their whole life, and that we have done beautiful things together, and how much I love them, that their loyalty and allegiance is to this thing, not to our actual thing, which is in the present, in their immediate environment. So that form of violence is incredibly problematic. And fortunately, I'm in a position of privilege where I can I can see that for what it is and not get undermined by it, and perhaps even be able to account and dissipate that. But these are, I'm in a position of great privilege for the fact that I've got this knowledge, and I've been in positions where I understand what is going on, so I don't react, or at least I can understand that their position is that they are worried, that they are afraid, that they've been commissioned with protection of groups of people, and I feel like a threat to an embarrassment to them. I understand all of that, but it's just weird how that works out, and that's exactly what they've been taught, because that's what we've all been taught, because that's the compliance, that's the violence that underpins these particular belief systems, and the way that it was set up by Joseph back in
it is
1830, 1840, right?
And because they're a sleeper cell, they now have to activate to protect, because you've done something, that may not be in the best interest of the church. Although I would question them and ask them what exactly in the book is a problem. You have passages of scripture, you have things from the Joseph Smith papers. I mean, what exactly are they saying is wrong? It's really just rehearsing history.
Yes, but that's a problem, because the history doesn't match the rhetoric, right?
But it's their history.
I've got some other books. Elizabeth Smart's book. This is a violence that was perpetrated against her because of what Joseph did.
Mm-hmm.
This one, other one, Jacinda,
yes.
my friend, she talks about her Mormon upbringing, and her great Mormon upbringing, I must say, but where she's had to depart because of the violence that she saw was being perpetrated against LGBTQ people, and how she couldn't, abide with that. So, these are, this is just the reality we swim in. If we can understand it and call it out, be accountable, maybe we can change it.
Yep. And it's really important to keep talking about it, because with all these scenarios that we've been talking about, everyone says, well, that doesn't have anything to do with Mormons today. That doesn't have anything to do with the church. We've heard this over and over, especially with Lori Vallow. That has nothing to do with it. Oh, you barely have to scratch to see that it has everything to do with it. And a lot of her justifications and things that she says, just using her as an example, if she weren't saying it from a jail cell, she could be saying it from the pulpit and it would sound familiar to people, so this rhetoric, this, like you said, this sort of seedy underbelly, it's very close to the surface. And we only see it when it erupts in these extreme ways, but it has everything to do with Mormonism. It wouldn't have happened without Mormonism. And they're not necessarily misunderstanding everything they've been taught from before. So yeah, we need to keep talking. It's important. Wow, this has been absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much, Ganesh, for bringing this to us. And thank you, Darren, for weighing in. I know you said before, oh, I don't know if I can be on a podcast. You're amazing. Everything. I guarantee the comments, they're going to go, Rebecca, you're talking too much. Let Darren talk. I know they're going to say that.
No, not at all.
The topic is so fascinating. I can't not weigh in. So no, you were great. You were absolutely fantastic. And I know we'll have a lot of people commenting. So please do comment. Let us know what you think about just this underpinning of violence throughout. I'm sure there are some examples we forgot. Please bring those up in the comments. And everybody, please, let's hold up our books again. Purchase Ganesh's book. Ever since I have known Ganesh, he has said, I'm writing a book. And after a year or so, I kind of thought, he's one of those guys that just says, I'm writing a book. We've run into those before. And then all of a sudden it's like, here it is. He actually shipped the product and literally shipped the product to me. So I'm glad it was a reality. And I'm glad you really were writing a book. And we're going to be excited to see where this goes. Like you said, you've already been on several podcasts about this, and you're going to be on more because there's so much to talk about. And rave reviews. I mean, just amazing reviews for just the way the book is put together. And I think you heard that from Darren, just a user, right? A reader, that it was amazing and helped him answer some questions. So that's great. So, all right, everybody.
Ganesh is the star.
He is the star. That's right. 5-star review.
I'm just happy to be useful. I am, very grateful that I'm in a position to care in such a way and be able to have a voice, really.
Yeah.
Because, like I said, lots of people talk to me and they have no voice, and hopefully this empowers people to understand enough and be able to then, act on whatever it is that they need to do, and if that means staying in the church, that's great. I am an active member. Darren's an active member, so being there and being understanding what's going on and committing to community and caring and looking out for the marginalized, those are all fantastic and important things to do. And if also it's causing you harm, and you just and this gives you the understanding that suggests, oh gosh, I need to change the situation so I am not in harm, so my family is cared for and protected, and the people that I love are empowered rather than marginalized. Well, then hopefully it gives you that ability and knowledge and action. So those are the things that I ever hope for, and also building bridges. Right, I can talk to my mother, because I can say, look, here are the things, and she can be completely in and be completely believing and still read these chapters and understand why I might have a different point of view, or vice versa. So that's important.
No, that's absolutely perfect. No, go ahead, Darren.
I was just saying, I wish you the best, Ganesh, with everything. And I'm married to a never mow, and I get some great advice from her, not religious. She says, you know what? When I go through these things in my mind, and what do I do, and this and that, and there's conflict going on, she says, just give it the Jesus smell test. Give it the Jesus filter, and what would Jesus do? And it's probably, of all the complex material and things we look at and go through, just to simplify things back to that. I do that, and I get a good feeling from you, Ganesh, that you're a kind, loving person, that you're trying to follow the teachings of Jesus. And so I wish you the best. Rebecca, same with you. Appreciate that, and let's just all love each other, like Jesus taught.
Oh, that's a perfect way to end. I love it. The Jesus smell test. That's perfect. Yep. And I hope that your stake leaders or ward leaders get that message too, Ganesh. That's disturbing to me to hear that they may be looking at you because of the book. Well, nothing happens.
This has been on the cards for a long time. So, but I'm fortunate actually that John Turner has released a biography at the same time, right?
Exactly.
That suggests actually, there are other people talking about these same things. It's important to talk about them, and also I'm not out of line with that. I'm actually completely in line with what the current scholarship and understandings of things are.
Yep. Here we go. Both of them. That's right. And he's a historian with, people might say, Ganesh, you have a horse in the race, right? LDS, but nothing. He just wrote as he research. So anyway, well, this has been a fabulous discussion. Please comment, everybody. Let us know what you thought. Please like and subscribe to Mormonish Podcast. And if you'd like to be made aware of when the new episodes come out, you can hit that notification bell. If you would like to make a financial contribution, donation to Mormonish Podcast, we always have links in our show notes to Donor Box. We are a nonprofit. And again, we always say thank you to all of you that do. It means so much. It allows us to have fantastic guests like Ganesh and Darren on. I mean, come on. This has been the power trio. No offense, Landon, but this has been really good. We also have links to our merch store if you want to grab some Mormonish merch. And we'll say thanks again, Ganesh. And thank you so much again, Darren. I think you should be on more podcasts. You have a lot to say, and we love to hear from you. So, all right, everybody, we will catch you next time on Mormonish. Thanks all.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of Mormonish. We really appreciate our listeners and would love to hear from you if you have a story you'd like to share. You can email us at mormonishpodcast@gmail.com. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, and on our website, mormonishpodcast.org. And don't forget to look for us on YouTube and like and subscribe. Keep joyful, everybody.